Hi there and welcome back to our series on social media budgeting. In our prior video, we talked about social media advertising, what the different types are, what the platforms are, and then how it's charged. Now we're going to go through what social media strategy actually is, what's included in a really proper social media strategy, and then to give you some sort of idea of the kind of money that you might need to get this stuff developed. To begin with, you need to cast your mind to two ends of a spectrum. Firstly, imagine the corner store. It's a milk bar, let's say, for example. Milk bar, they sell the stuff that a milk bar sells. The other end of the spectrum, we have a Rio Tinto, or an organisation that is so large that they're known the country over. Maybe Telstra is a good example. They're listed on the stock exchange, they've got shareholders, they've got government interaction, they've got a board of directors, they've got thousands of employees. It's a big business. Both ends of that spectrum need different things from social media. You might initially say, well, no, they don't. They both need to advertise their stuff, don't they? No, not quite. So on the left-hand side of the spectrum, if we talk about our milk bar, the milk bar needs to sell things, needs to engage with the local community on things that could be of interest to that community. So think about local schools. Maybe there's a fete that's happening and they want to leverage that fete to get more people to see their brand. Ultimately, though, it's to sell more stuff, but you'll also have reviews. And reviews are where someone from the local community will have said, I've been to that milk bar, it was wonderful, I had the best cappuccino there. That goes on that person, on the milk bar's Facebook page. Next thing you know, they're having a conversation with the community virtually. It does centre around mostly selling things, but it's also a little bit of reputation management. The other end of the spectrum, the Telstras of the world. Telstra do need to sell stuff, but social media probably isn't going to be a huge driver for them because let's face it, they do TV, they've got their website, they've got the stores, and let's face it, everyone knows who Telstra is. They have a reputation they have to uphold. If something is bad in the marketplace, maybe they have a bit of a PR disaster, there's some sort of corruption or some bad thing that goes on, that'll end up on social media. Telstra needs to manage that implication because there'll be a lot of bad commentary that happens, there'll be complaints, there'll be negativity, all that sort of stuff. They need to manage that, but why? Well, there's a lot of personal reputations at risk. They have a board of directors. Those board of directors are liable for what happens within that business. If there's some very bad commentary that might reflect badly on the board of directors or one of those people, that person could in fact end up in quite a lot of trouble with the government or with the powers that be. That could be a real legal problem for them. So Telstra needs to manage that quite strategically and quite tightly and know what the plan is to handle circumstances like that where things go pear-shaped. They need also to set the ground rules for their staff. What are staff allowed to say? What aren't they allowed to say? What security settings allow staff to remain protected in their involvement with social media to make sure that their own personal profiles aren't somehow tampered with by maybe a disgruntled customer or something like that. There's a lot more for Telstra to consider than perhaps the local corner store. Both are very important in their own right, but they don't need the same thing. Considering that analogy for a moment, social media strategy is broken down into two sections, the marketing component and the compliance component. Now, we haven't listed all the compliance components because there's not really enough space, but both are fairly important. The marketing components are all about things that market your brand, the outward-facing content, the outward-facing communication that you're going to put of your brand on social media. By contrast, the compliance side of things is more the internal part. It's the part that a larger organisation, think the Telstras of the world, the part that they need to do to cover their own behinds, so to speak, internally, because they've got to be protected and they've got to be sure they're doing everything properly. Not every company needs all of this because you've got the Telstras that need really everything and you've got the corner store that probably only needs part of the marketing component. That's how you need to think about social media strategy. Think about the kind of organisation you are. Think about what matters to you, what's most important to you. Think about the risks that are at play on social. If there is some negativity, what's the risk? If you're the sole director of a company, maybe it's not that big a risk, but if you've got several different shareholders and holding companies and partnership relationships and you're connected to the government and whatever else, you need to have that stuff under control, because if you don't, something goes wrong, it can be a really big issue. What matters to you as a business? That's what you need to take into account. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through what each of these modules include to give you a bit of an idea of the sort of things that are talked about, and I'll roughly give you an idea of the kind of numbers that you need to be thinking about to cover this sort of a strategy. So to begin with, in the marketing piece, you need some brand definition work. Now, in a lot of cases, particularly with larger organisations, the brand definition stuff is already done. We've had an agency come in, they've done the branding workshop, it's all, lovely defined stuff, and there's a style guide and there's colours and imagery and all that sort of stuff. If you have that already, in a lot of cases, it's not all that important to do it in the social media strategy. However, it needs at least to be referenced. So for example, if you were to get us to do your social media strategy, if you already had that content, we would merely take the parts out of it that we need, stick it in here, it's our point of reference. You don't really pay much for that. Social strategy. Now you'll notice here it doesn't say social media strategy. In another video, I'll take you through the underpinnings of social strategy. It's a very different way of thinking from conventional marketing. What we do here is define a social strategy, which is a social reason for consumers to engage with your brand on social media. It's not just about blasting out content. What's the social incentive for people to engage with you? Whilst it's a very small module, it happens to be very important because it gives the underpinning for everything else. Content streams. Again, in another video, I'll take you through the different types of content streams, but content streams quite simply are the stuff you're going to put out. There's 3 different genres of content stream: thought leadership, humanizing the brand, and sales promotion. Depending on your brand, you'll need different numbers of those content streams, a different mix, and of course the content sources come into play there as well. Content streams are almost the #1 most frequently used module out of all of this because, let's face it, it tells you what you're going to put out there. Fan acquisition is all about acquiring new fans and followers to see your stuff. If back in the early days, you had a Facebook page, you launched it, you got 100 fans, it was a big deal, right? Well, not so big now, but if you had a few hundred followers, you were starting to grow. It became really important very early on to grow as many fans as you possibly can because they're going to see your stuff. There's a number of different ways of doing fan acquisition. Social media advertising is one of them that I talked about earlier. But there are a number of other very smart ways you can do things that will grow your following quite rapidly without a whole lot of money. In this module, we will go through a number of those ideas and generate both mechanics and campaigns for you to grow your fan base fairly rapidly. Cross-platform and cross-platform integration. Social media is one part of your digital presence. It needs to work in unison with everything else. Think, for example, you've probably got a website, you've probably got some landing pages, you've probably got a mailing list, you might have a YouTube channel, you might have maybe an affiliate page on someone else's website. All of these pieces of the puzzle will come into play and they should interact. You'll direct people off your social profiles onto your Facebook page. Maybe you'll direct people off your Facebook page over to perhaps a member sign-up form, something like that. You need to know how they're going to interact so you can create the blueprint for it. Because if you don't know how it's going to interact and it's not documented, how are your fans going to know what they're doing? And secondly, how are you going to have a consistent message shared with your fans telling them to do that particular thing? It needs to be documented and architected. Security and privacy settings. This is a really interesting one. Security settings are all about the security settings that need to be on your social profiles to give you the level of protection that you are happy with. A really simple example here would be the profanity filter. Some brands are quite happy to let the profanity filter be very wide because it suits their brand voice. Other brands need it to be very conservative, no profanity at all, or somewhere in between. That filter needs to be set a certain way so that you, as the brand owner, are happy with what can occur on your social presence. That and many other settings are defined in the security component. By contrast, the privacy settings are the other way around. So you'll have people that are working on your social profile or people that are working within your business that might engage with your social content. And the Telstra example here is a pertinent one. The privacy settings here tell your team members what privacy settings you as an employer recommend them to have on their personal profiles to protect them from any unwanted attention really or communication from people that might be engaging with the social content in a positive or perhaps even negative way. Community management strategy or community management plan. This is incredibly pivotal, but it's often lost. The community management strategy is the blueprint for how you will approve your your followers to be engaged with on social media. Simple example here, the words that can be used and the words that can't be used. Or the topics that can be spoken about and the topics that can't be spoken about. Real world example here is the mortgage broking world. As a mortgage broker in Australia, you're not allowed to give financial advice unless you have the certification for it. Therefore, you must never ever use the word financial advice in commentary that is being used to a social media fan. The community manager can't ever say or even appear to be giving financial advice to a fan. You're breaking all sorts of rules. Documenting that here means in the blueprint when you hand it to whichever community manager that you have, that person knows this is what I can say or this is what I can't say. The community management strategy also includes an escalation process, and this is important. The escalation process says, in the event of a sales inquiry, a technical/customer service type inquiry, or a complaint, who do we send it to, and what's the timeframes that we can expect to get response from them, and how? The example being, if you happen to get a complaint at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, you need to make it really clear to your community manager, right, that complaint is a level 2 severity, therefore it goes to James, here's his phone number, and you can call him 24 hours a day, or whatever the agreement is that you have. The documentation of that is vitally important to make sure your brand communication is up to scratch. Monitoring and measurement. Monitoring is all about how you are monitoring the big bad world of social media, not just your own profiles. You can be measuring all sorts of KPIs, you can be measuring competitors, you can be measuring uses of a hashtag, you can be measuring mentions of your own product or brand. It's all about everything that is external to your profiles. By contrast, measurement is all about measuring your profiles, measuring the profiles that you own as a business, and then measuring the engagement, measuring the impressions, measuring the like growth, all of those things that are important to success on social media. They're defined here. The frequency at which they are measured is defined here. The targets that you wish to achieve are defined here. All those KPIs are basically set in stone within the development of the strategy. So all of this is just the marketing stuff. We haven't even hit compliance yet. As you can tell, there's a lot that goes into this, but all this is necessary to make sure that you have a properly built out social media strategy and social media presence. If you embark on social without doing these things, essentially what happens is you learn as you go. If you're happy to wear that, that's okay, but you won't have KPIs set. You won't have an escalation plan set. Your profanity filter might be set wrong. You won't have any fan growth. You won't really be too sure what you're putting out there, but you'll give it a bit of a crack. It all is built as you do it. Documenting it up front can save any ambiguity, and it means everybody knows what they're doing from the get-go. So into the compliance side of things. As I mentioned before, I haven't listed all of the modules included here because it would go on for quite a long way. But to give you a bit of an idea of the sort of things that are necessary and included in the compliance element of a social media strategy. Organizational roles. Within a business, there's many different people that engage in part of the social media content generation. You might initially say, well, hang on, isn't it just the one person that sticks the post up on Facebook? No. If you're in a large enough organization, that one person has sourced the content from here and from here and from here. But the person that's fed it to this person may have sourced it from 3 or 4 people up above. For example, in a B2B organisation where they're selling maybe consulting services, there'll be a sales team, and that sales team will be engaging with their customers frequently. That engagement means they might get a testimonial, they might get a photo, they could get a really nice little snippet that would go really well on social media. How does that get to the community manager? In a 2,000 person company, how does it get there? Well, you need to build the organisational chart for it, because it goes from this person to this person to this person to online. That org chart is as important for social as it is for any other service delivery within a business. HR policy, or the social media HR policy, what you get here essentially is the do's and don'ts for social media within an organisation. It is a template, however, it can be put directly into any employment contract. It's developed by a certified HR professional in Australia. You simply need to change a few metrics and names and it can go straight into your employment contract. The risk management plan. I talked before about some of the risks that might happen in the Telstra example, where board members might have personal liabilities for something that happens within the business. The risk management plan sets in place identification of all the risks, so what the risks actually look like, definition of their impacts, and then the mitigation strategy to go along with that. So when those risks happen, here's the negativity that could occur, and here's all the things that we're going to do to mitigate those risks either before they occur or after they've occurred. This is an incredibly detailed document and a very detailed plan because it covers so many scenarios that you don't even know are going to happen. They may never happen, but it's a lot of work that goes into protecting against something that could happen at some point in the future. Again, depending on the size of organisation you are and the exposure that you have either personally or within the marketplace, that will determine whether you even need a risk management plan or not. So that's a bit of a feeling of what's in the compliance section. There are other modules that do things of a similar nature. To give you an idea on pricing for this, when you look in our budgeting workbook, you will see with much more detail what's priced where. However, to give you a bit of a feeling, the marketing side of things, generally speaking, you would get away for nothing less than maybe $3,000 or $4,000, up to maybe 10 or 15 to cover everything completely, depending on the size of your brand. As soon as you bring the compliance modules in, the price goes up quite a bit. To do everything for a larger organisation, to include the compliance, you can be looking 15, 20, 25, 30 grand, depending of course upon the size of the organisation, the number of stakeholders, and the amount of content that needs to go into it. Again, as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Either email us directly or leave any questions in the comment section below. We will endeavour to answer any of them as best as we possibly can and as quickly as we possibly can. The next session we're going to talk about is social media influencers and the 4 different strategies you can use to engage them. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.